Sir, We Have an Orc Problem is one of those games that quietly drops on Steam, but when you start playing, man, it's so much deeper than it looks. I went in thinking it was just another fun little strategy game, and a few hours later, there I was, at 2 a.m., redoing my tactics for the 5th time because one wrong decision early in the match ruined me at the very end. And that's exactly why I put this video together. After losing more matches than I'd like to admit, I've gathered 10 advanced tips that would have saved me hours of frustration if someone had told me them earlier. So grab your shield, because we're getting straight to the point. Let's get into the video. In this game, it's no use trying to build the perfect defense right off the bat if you haven't boosted your resource gains yet. I myself only started to feel real progress when I stopped thinking about winning the run and started thinking about how much I'm extracting from this run. The reward upgrades at the end of battle are absurdly strong, especially the percentages and the bonuses for a perfect clear. They scale in such a way that the earlier you invest in them, the faster the game starts to open up. It's that classic snowball effect. You earn more resources, unlock more stuff, and suddenly builds that used to seem impossible start working consistently. And there's another point I used to ignore. A bad run is still profit. Seriously. Didn't drop the wave you wanted? It doesn't matter. If you focused on maximizing your earnings, that attempt already left you stronger for the next one. I started looking at each run almost as a strategic farm, not as a definitive attempt at victory. In the end, this mindset accelerates everything. You get to drilling faster, unlock more towers, and unlock skills that truly change the game. And then yeah, when you go back to try playing seriously, the game is already much more in your hands. It's the kind of mindset adjustment that turns frustration into steady progress. The first thing that caught me off guard was realizing that the orcs aren't your standard tower defense enemies. They act like a physical fluid, and that changes everything. Forget that fixed path mentality we carry over from other games in the genre, because here, orcs spread out, stick to walls, and change their routes depending on the collisions and knockback you apply to them. That's my favorite part. They behave like water. When you squeeze a group into a narrow corridor, they overflow through the sides and find routes you didn't even know existed. I've seen an entire wave bypass my main defense simply because a tower pushed the ones in front into a side opening that I had completely ignored. So here's my personal advice. Before placing any tower, let a wave pass on purpose, or pause the game to carefully observe. Use that time to map out where the orcs actually concentrate and what the edges of the map are where the stragglers escape. It's in these spots that most defeats happen, not on the obvious path the game seems to suggest. Once you understand this flow, the game becomes something else entirely. You stop reacting to the waves and start predicting where the tide of orcs will hit the hardest. Your towers stop being scattered decorations and turn into containment barriers placed exactly where the pressure is real. Trust me, one sacrificed wave at the beginning saves hours of frustration later. At first, I would leave the gunners and cannons firing cones wide open, thinking the more area covered, the better. The result? A bunch of bullets flying into nothingness while the horde passed by laterally, and I'd get pissed watching my DPS go down the drain. It was only when I started narrowing this cone as much as possible that things really turned around. The logic is simple, but people ignore it. The orcs move like a river. If you align a very narrow cone right over the main flow, they walk straight into the muzzle. It's not that sideways crossing that makes the tower waste half its shots on empty space. I keep tweaking it until the arc is almost a straight line over the path where the heavy mass passes. It's annoying at first, but then it becomes an addiction. The best part is the cascade effect. When the first orc takes the shot and dies, or deflects a bit, the bullet still has a real chance of hitting the next guy in line, because everyone is queued up on the same axis. In dense waves, this turns into a clearing machine. I've lost count of how many times I've seen a single burst take down 3-4 guys just because the alignment was perfect. Too wide and you waste it. Narrow and aligned, and every projectile works double time. So next time you're placing a gunner or cannon, pause for a second. Look at the flow, narrow the cone, and aim straight down the main path. I do this on every single target tower now, and the difference in efficiency is absurd, especially in the later stages when the sheer number of orcs gets crazy. Try it out and tell me if you don't feel the same shift. It's worth every second of micro-adjusting. This one, for me, was the moment the game truly turned a corner. Piercing isn't just a good upgrade, it's the strongest multiplier in the game. In Sir, We Have an Orc Problem, when you unlock this for gunners and cannons, it feels like you went from a toy gun to something actually effective against a horde. Before that, you feel like you're always playing catch-up. The reason is simple, but the impact is huge. Instead of a shot hitting a single orc, it starts piercing through multiple ones. And when you're dealing with those tightly packed lines of enemies, that basically multiplies your damage without needing to increase the number of towers. A single shot hitting 3, 4, even 5 orcs completely changes lane control. I started noticing that builds that used to stall in the mid-game simply started to flow. That feeling of, I'm almost holding them, but a group always slips past, disappears. With piercing, you clear the front and still weaken what's coming behind, creating a domino effect that makes defense much more stable. If there is a real turning point in progression, this is it. Once you invest heavily in piercing, the game becomes more forgiving for testing other strategies, because your damage baseline is already sorted out. It's the kind of upgrade that doesn't just increase your DPS, it redefines how you approach every wave. One of the first lessons I learned is that flamethrower position is everything. I place them as far forward as possible in the choke points, because the logic is simple. The longer an orc spends burning while walking, the higher the total damage it accumulates. When you put the flamethrower way in the back, you waste all the distance the enemy could be suffering. And here comes the trick that changed my game. Stacking flamethrowers in the same corridor. 2 or 3 lined up flamethrowers create an absurd multi-burn, and the entire horde arrives halfway already melting. It's expensive, yes, but the return in efficiency is absurd, especially in the densest waves. What I like most about this strategy is how it works as preparation for the rest of the defense. The flamethrowers are excellent for softening the horde before the piercing towers do the heavy lifting. The orcs reach my sniper and bow and arrow towers already at half health, and then it's just cleanup. If you combine this tip with reading the orc flow, you practically become an architect of destruction. You already know where the tide hits hardest, and now you put fire right at that spot. The result is a defense that looks simple, but that dismantles waves that used to seem impossible. One of the things that most made me level up was stopping treating cannons as pure damage towers and starting to use them as a barrier. I take these narrow corridors, point the cannon directly against the flow, and let the knockback do the work. The orcs come pushing, the cannon sends them back, and suddenly you have a living wall holding the horde in place. It's addictive to watch. The trick is to combine this with high piercing. When the projectile pierces multiple targets at once and still pushes the entire line back, the corridor turns into a meat grinder. I keep an eye on the funnel points of the map, those places where the path narrows and the orcs are forced to bunch up. That's where the cannon truly shines. In the beginning, I used to spread cannons anywhere in the open and thought I was doing it right. Result? Knockback throwing orcs to the side, messing up the rest of the defense and wasting the tower's potential. Now I only position them in narrow bottlenecks, aligned against the tide. The difference in horde control is absurd, especially in the densest waves. So in the next run, look for these funnels, plant the cannon aiming straight at the flow, and invest in piercing. You'll feel the horde stall, retreat, and melt all at once. I don't start a serious run anymore without at least one of these setups. Try it out, and you'll understand why I get so excited about this combination. Mortars are much more than pretty area damage on screen. They are tools for total wave control. When I started using them thinking about positioning and not just damage, the game completely changed. Their knockback literally messes up the orcs' pathing, and that opens up space for much smarter strategies than just stacking strong towers. The secret, for me, was to stop putting mortars right in the choke point and start positioning them a bit earlier. That way, you push the enemies back and sort of organize the horde, making them more grouped up when they finally enter the main defense zone. This makes towers with piercing or line damage simply melt everything at once. And when you start stacking mortars on the same spot, that's when things get even more interesting. The push effect becomes constant, almost as if you were controlling the pace of the wave. Instead of the orcs arriving spaced out and hard to deal with, they come compacted, predictable, and much easier to eliminate. For me, this completely changed the way I build defenses. Mortars stopped being support and became a key piece of setup. You're not just dealing damage, you're shaping the wave however you want, preparing the ground for your strongest towers to do the heavy lifting with maximum efficiency. If there's one philosophy that completely changed the way I play, it's layered defense. Instead of spreading towers all over the map and hoping for the best, I concentrate everything into 1 or 2 choke points and stack different types of damage. The front of the line belongs to the flamethrowers, which start burning the orcs from their very first step. They apply that prolonged damage that melts the horde while it's still organizing itself. Right behind comes the middle of the defense, where the heavy lifting happens. Cannons and gunners with piercing kick into action when the orcs are already weakened and grouped up. This combination is perfect for clearing high density, because the cannon explodes in the middle of the mass, and the gunners pierce whoever is still standing. This is where most waves die, and in the back, I leave the final cleanup. More gunners or mortars are positioned to catch the stragglers, those stubborn orcs that slip through the edges or arrive crawling with a sliver of life. Without this last layer, you watch 2 or 3 enemies walk right through your perfect defense and ruin the match. The secret is overlapping coverage on the same choke points instead of spreading towers across the entire map. Concentration of fire almost always beats wide coverage, because one well-defended point holds up much better than 5 mediocre points. When you put together the 3 tips I shared, reading the orc flow, putting fire in the front, and stacking layers, the game stops being about reaction and becomes total control. One of the hardest things for me to learn was to stop pressing the missile button as soon as the wave started. Seriously, the temptation is huge. You see that sea of orcs coming down the front line, and your finger is already itching to drop a strafing run right in the middle of them. But what I discovered after losing several late-game matches is that these active abilities weren't made for wave openings. They were made to solve genuinely massive problems. Think about it. At the start of the wave, your towers are in prime condition to hold the line. The orcs are spread out. There's no real pressure at any specific point. Wasting an orbital laser there is literally throwing resources away, because your defenses would do the exact same job for free. The right time to use a missile, nuke, or strafing run is when critical mass forms. That moment when you look at the screen and see way too many orcs piled up in one spot, or worse, when they start leaking and you see that row of enemies escaping through the back of the map. I adopted a mental rule that changed my game. Active abilities only come out of the pocket when the situation is already an emergency, or when the cluster of orcs is so dense that the attack's value multiplies. A well-placed nuke on top of thousands of bunched-up orcs is worth infinitely more than 3 nukes used early on small groups. It's a matter of patience and reading the field, not quick reflexes. And there's one more detail a lot of people ignore. The radius and damage upgrades for these abilities are ridiculously good investments at high levels. When you reach the waves with tens of thousands of orcs, what separates a screen-clearing orbital strike from one that just tickles the enemy is exactly that. If you're pushing into the infinite waves and you're not upgrading the range and damage of your abilities, you're basically using an expired fire extinguisher. Trust me, keep your finger off the button early on, invest in the upgrades, and use these weapons when the situation is screaming for them. In this game, positioning isn't a minor detail. It's practically half the outcome of the run. There were plenty of times I thought my build was bad, when in reality, the problem was just where I had placed the towers. I started doing runs purely to observe, with no commitment to winning. I kept an eye on the orcs' flow, where they grouped up, where they leaked, how they interacted with knockback and choke points. And then, on the next attempt, I would tweak little things. It wasn't a radical change, it was just a matter of moving a tower slightly forward, or rotating its angle of attack. And it is staggering how these micro changes make an impact. Sometimes moving a tower by a single meter lets it hit more enemies per line, or sync up better with another defense. Suddenly, that "I almost held them" turns into total wave control. It sounds like an exaggeration, but the game really is that sensitive. In the end game, this becomes even more obvious. The difference between failing at the end and getting a perfect clear doesn't necessarily lie in upgrades, but in these fine-tuning tweaks. When you start treating each attempt as an experiment, the game opens up so much more, and you stop blaming the build and start truly mastering the system.